In lesson 13, we're going to find equivalent ratios when we're given the total quantity. So we're going to work backwards quite a bit in this exercise. The situation that we start off with in example 1 is a group of hikers who are preparing for a 1-week trip, and all of the group's supplies will be carried by the hikers in backpacks. So they want to make it fair for each hiker to carry the backpack that has the same fraction of his weight. In other words, has the same ratio or the same rate in relationship to the other hikers. In this setup, the heaviest hiker would carry the heaviest load, and the lightest hiker would carry the lightest load. The table is showing the weight of each hiker and the weight of his or her backpack, at least to start off. So we're going to complete the table, filling in the missing amounts, the weight, by applying the same ratio as the first 2 rows. In order for us to apply the same ratio as the first 2 rows, we actually have to find the ratio in the first 2 rows. Because we are looking at numbers that have different units within the same number, pounds and ounces, we do need to convert these numbers so that they are representing just pounds. So to convert 152 pounds and 4 ounces, I would do 152, and 4 ounces in relationship to 16 ounces and 1 pound would be 1/4 of a pound. Likewise for the backpack weight, 14 pounds and 8 ounces out of 16 ounces would be 1/2 of a pound. We'll do the same thing with the second numbers before we go to calculate. 107 pounds and 10 ounces out of 16 ounces, 10/16 would simplify to 5/8 of a pound. And then finally 10 pounds 4 ounces would be 10 pounds and 1/4 of a pound for the 4 ounces. If we just simply add the weights together, we would get 166 3/4, which is 12 ounces out of 16 ounces simplified. For the first, 117 7/8, which again is 14 ounces. 10 plus 4 is 14 ounces out of 16 ounces, also simplified. Then we would go back and calculate the rate for each of these. And the rate when we find it would be 2/11. We know that by taking the y value, remember x, y in our tables, the y value, 14 1/2, dividing it by 152 1/4, which would give us 2/21. And when we check the rate for the second, we find the same thing. Now, knowing this piece of information, we would then take our 129 15 ounces, which converted would be 129 15/16, and we would multiply that times 2/21. When we multiply times, if you remember, the rate when we find it is multiplying times the x value to get the y value. So multiplying by this small fraction will give us a smaller number. Our answer then would be 12 3/8, and we add those two together to get 142 5/16. And we do the same thing for 68 pounds 4 ounces. 68 pounds 4 ounces would be 68 1/4 pounds. We multiply that times 2/21, which is our rate, and we would get 6 1/2. Adding them together would be 74 3/4. Then we come down to these next values in which the backpack is given, but the weight of the backpacker is not. We'll translate the 8 pounds 12 ounces to 8 3/4, which is 12/16 simplified, and the 10 can stand by itself. Given the fact that we have the y value and we're looking for the x value, we are going to have to work backwards, which means we're going to have to divide rather than multiply by 2/21. And when we divide 8 3/4 by 2/21, we get 91 7/8 pounds. 91 7/8 pounds. Then we can add the 91 7/8 and 8 3/4 to get 105/8 pounds. Because remember, when you add and you get a number greater than the 16 ounces, you would have the fractional. And in the final example, multiplying 10 pounds times 2, or dividing 10 pounds by 2/21 will give you 105. And when you add the two together, 115 pounds for the total weight. In example 2, talking about the meat lovers pizza, they want to know the total amount of toppings. So we would add 1/4 and 1/3 and 1/6 and 1/8 and 1/8, and we find that the meat lovers pizza has 1 cup of total toppings on it. Then we need to look down into the table to find the ratios of items involved. To determine the amounts for each order, you would want to take one of the values that they give you and determine by how much that has increased from the original recipe. So in order 1, if there's 1 cup of sausage and the original ratio is 1/4 cup of sausage, we can determine by dividing that this is 4 times as much sausage as the original. So then our constant would be 4, and for each of these values we would multiply the original amount by 4. That would give us 1 1/3 cups of pepperoni, 2/3 cup bacon, because we're going to get 4/6 and then we'll simplify it to 2/3. Obviously the 1/2 for ham, which is already there, and 1/2 for beef, because that's the same amount anyway. Moving over to order 2, 1 cup of bacon, since the original is 1/6 cup of bacon, if we divide 1 by 1/6, we'll find that that is 6 times the original amount of bacon. So we'll go back into each one of these ratios and multiply by 6. 6/4 would be 1 1/2 cups of sausage. 6 times 1/3 would end up giving us 2 cups of pepperoni. For the ham, if we multiply that by 6, we get 6/8 cup of ham, which simplifies to 3/4. And the beef, of course, is exactly the same. Finally, on order 3, if there are 3 cups of pepperoni, 3 cups of pepperoni can only be yielded when you multiply by 9, because that would give you 9/3, and 9 divided by 3 is 3. So our constant is 9. 9 times 1/4. 9/4 would give you 2 1/4 for the sausage. 9 times 1/6 would be 9/6, which is 1 1/2 simplified for the bacon. And 9 times 1/8 would be 9/8, which simplifies to 1 1/8. Then we can add up all the toppings. Order 1 would be 4 cups of toppings. Order 2 is 6 cups of toppings. And order 3 is 9 cups of toppings. That's a lot of meat on a pizza. Exercise 1 is looking at 6 different size pans of the same recipe of macaroni and cheese. And it is in a very similar manner to the one before, but slightly different. What we want to find is the ratio of noodles and cheese, because that will allow us to find these missing amounts of noodles and cheese. Remember, y to x. So what I would be looking at is 3/4 divided by 3. Remember, when we are dividing fractions, that both have to be fractions. So I turned 3 into 3/1 and then changed it to multiplication and multiplied by the reciprocal of the second fraction, in keeping with our multiplication or division of fraction rules. 3/4 times 1/3 is 3/12, which simplifies to 1/4. And so our constant then is 1/4. Cheese is 1/4 the amount of noodles. Now, if that is the case, we can go to these easier entries first and multiply 2/3 times 1/4, which would give you 2/12, and that simplifies to 1/6. 5 1/3 cups of noodles. Changing that 5 1/3 to an improper fraction, you would get 16/3, and 16/3 times 1/4 would be 16/12, and simplified would give us 1 1/3. And then we will go back up to some of these other values. Let's do the easiest one first. 1/4 cup of cheese. Now, since this is our y value, we'll need to divide to find the x value. So what we're really doing is taking 1/4 and dividing it by 1/4. But remember, when we divide fractions, we have to multiply by the reciprocal. So we're actually doing 1/4 times 4/1. Let's show that. Four over 1 being our reciprocal of 1/4. We're dividing 1/4 by 1/4, and in dividing fractions we have to find the reciprocal of the second fraction and then multiply, which will give us 1. We'll go ahead and add the amounts. 3 plus 3/4 is 3 3/4. 1 plus 1/4 is 1 1/4. 2/3 plus 1/6 is actually 5/6. And 5 1/3 plus 1 1/3 is 6 2/3. That leaves us with the two entries where we have the actual number of cups in the pan, or our final answer, and we have to find the amount of noodles and cheese. Keeping in mind our original ratio, or our rate, is 1 to 4, which means we would have 1 cup of cheese to 4 cups of noodles. One cup cheese to 4 cups noodles. We can then use that ratio to take a look at what we might be missing. 1 cup of cheese and 4 cups of noodles would add up to 5 cups altogether. So our first entry is actually rather easy. In the last entry then, What we want to do is take our total amount and divide it by the 5 pieces altogether. That will tell us how much would be in 1 unit. So we take the 5 and 5/8. Let's change that to an improper fraction, making it 45/8. And we're going to divide it, remember, by 5. But when we divide with fractions, we have to multiply by the reciprocal. So we're going to multiply by 1/5. Remember again, we were taking this number and dividing it by 5, which is the same as multiplying by 1/5. And simplified, that would give us 9/8, or 1 1/8. Now, since 1 part cheese would be 1 1/8, that number times 4 will tell us how many noodles. And simplified, that would be 4 1/2. Lots of steps, but still doable.